The first hint of dawn did not come as a sudden burst of light, but as a gentle softening of the darkness. The stars faded one by one, like candles being pinched out by an invisible hand, and a pale blue washed slowly across the sky. Beneath an old oak tree whose branches twisted outward like the arms of a slumbering giant, a lone knight began to wake. Sir Aldric did not open his eyes immediately. He felt the cold dampness of the earth beneath his cloak, the rough texture of roots pressing against his shoulder, and the whisper of a soft breeze that slipped between the leaves above. A faint bird song fluttered at the edge of hearing, a tentative melody that had not yet grown into the full chorus of morning. For a moment, he lay perfectly still, letting the world around him reassemble itself in silence. There was no shouted command to pull him from sleep, no trumpet call, no clamor of armor, no distant rumble of marching men, just the quiet breath of the land. He opened his eyes. The canopy overhead was a mesh of black branches outlined against a brightening sky. Patches of cloud drifted lazily between them. Dew glittered on his cloak in tiny droplets, catching what little light there was and turning it into faint glimmers. Aldric pushed himself up slowly, his joints protesting the chill of the night. He had slept in worse conditions, on stone, in mud, in the shadow of walls that might not survive the morning, but the stiffness still surprised him. Age was catching up with him in quiet, patient steps. He stretched, rolling his shoulders until his chainmail shifted with a soft, metallic rustle. Today he wore only light armor, a simple mail shirt beneath a travel-worn surcoat, his heavier plate packed away. This journey was not meant for battle. It was meant for understanding, for observation, for the kind of listening that required no shield and no spear. Nearby, his horse lifted its head. Bramble was a strong, dappled gelding whose coat seemed to catch every color of the morning. His dark eyes watched Aldric with patient familiarity. When the night approached, Bramble snorted softly and leaned into his touch as Aldric ran a hand along his neck. "Good morning, old friend. Another day with no orders and no banners, just the road." He checked the saddle straps, tightened a loose buckle, and glanced over the few possessions strapped behind the saddle. A rolled cloak, a small cooking pot, a leather pouch of dried food, a flask, and a worn leather journal with its corners bent from years of travel. His sword hung at his side, the leather of the scabbard cracked and faded, but well cared for. Its presence was a habit, part of him, like a limb he would never leave behind. Yet in his heart, Aldric hoped the blade would remain sheathed the entire journey. The sky brightened a little more. A soft gold spread along the horizon, pushing back the blue. The silhouette of distant hills sharpened, and the fields beyond the tree line began to glow faintly with the color of waking day. Aldric took a deep breath. The air was cold and clean, edged with the scent of damp soil, crushed grass, and something sweet and wild he couldn't quite name. It smelled like possibility. He gathered the reins, placed one boot in the stirrup, and swung himself up into the saddle with practiced ease. Bramble shifted his weight to accommodate the familiar burden, then stood steady, waiting. For a moment, Aldric simply sat there, listening to the breathing of his horse, the sighing of the wind, the first clear chirps of bold birds greeting the morning. Then, with a gentle press of his heels, he urged Bramble forward. They left the shelter of the ancient oak and moved toward the open road, toward a day that belonged to no lord, no battlefield, no obligation, but the quiet promise he had made to himself: to know the land he served, to walk it without armor in his heart, to travel not as a weapon, but as a witness. The path revealed itself gradually, as if the land were waking up and remembering where it had put it. The road was a pale band of packed earth, winding between low, rolling hills, fringed on either side by tall grasses still heavy with dew. Mist clung to the ground, drifting in thin wisps that swirled lazily as Bramble's hooves passed through them. Aldric allowed the horse to walk at an easy pace. There was no reason to hurry. For the first time in a long time, he was not riding toward something urgent or away from something terrible. He was simply moving through the world, letting it unfold in front of him step by step. Above, the sky grew brighter, softening from pale blue into streaks of peach and gold. Clouds drifted gently, their edges glowing. The more the sun rose, the more the mist began to lift, revealing fragments of the countryside that had been hidden only moments before. To his left, a cluster of old trees, their trunks thick and twisted, stood in a small copse. A faint trail led into their shadows, hardly more than a suggestion in the grass. To his right, the land sloped gently downward into a shallow valley where a handful of sheep grazed, their woolly forms like patches of fog left behind. A shepherd stood among them, leaning on a crooked staff. When he noticed the knight, he lifted one hand in a small, uncertain wave. Aldric returned the gesture with a nod. It felt strange in a way to be seen without the context of war. In villages and fortresses, people looked at knights with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Armor meant authority, but it also meant danger. Stories of battles, of raids, of enemies that might one day come marching down the road. Today, Aldric was only a traveler. He listened to the rhythm of Bramble's hooves, a steady, calming beat upon the softened earth. The sound blended with the distant rushing of wind through fields and the occasional call of a bird overhead. For a time, he let his thoughts wander. He remembered the first time he had ridden out as a young squire, heart pounding, hand clenched around a spear that felt too large for him. The world had seemed enormous then, full of threats and expectations. The sky had felt heavier, the road steeper. Now, after years of service, the world felt vast in a different way. There were still dangers. There would always be dangers. But there was also this, the quiet of a morning where no one expected him to kill or charge or defend a line. He adjusted his cloak as a breeze picked up, carrying with it a faint scent of smoke from some distant hearth, someone's breakfast fire, perhaps. The thought grounded him. Somewhere out there, people were waking, stretching, lighting their stoves, tending to animals, beginning another day of ordinary life. Those were the lives he had pledged to protect. Not kings on their thrones, not walls or banners, people, villages, fields like these.
A bird swooped low over the road and then darted upward, disappearing into the sky. Aldric watched it go, then gave Bramble a gentle pat on the neck. One step at a time, the day is still young, and the road carried them deeper into the waking land.
The sound of water reached him before he saw it. A soft murmur, like someone whispering secrets just out of earshot. The road dipped slightly, curving toward a shallow stream that cut across the path. Sunlight struck the moving surface and scattered into countless sparkling points, like fragments of a shattered mirror drifting downstream. Bramble slowed on his own, ears twitching as they neared the water. Aldric dismounted, letting his boots sink a little into the soft, damp earth at the stream's edge. The air here felt cooler, touched by the gentle chill of flowing water. Grass along the banks bent low beneath the weight of dew, and small white flowers nodded their heads in the breeze. He knelt and dipped his hands into the stream. The water was clear enough to see the smooth stones beneath, rounded and pale, worn down by the passage of countless seasons. Tiny fish flickered between them, darting away at the disturbance. He cupped his hands and lifted the water to his lips. It was fresh and cold, with a faint metallic tang of minerals from deep underground. He closed his eyes as he drank, allowing the coolness to spread through his chest, washing away the last remnants of sleep. Bramble lowered his head and drank greedily, sending ripples across the surface. Aldric smiled faintly. "Easy, boy. Leave some for the rest of the world." He sat back on his heels, letting his gaze wander along the length of the stream. It wound away in both directions, vanishing into clusters of trees. Somewhere far from here, it would join other streams, then a river, and eventually something larger still. The thought that this small trickle of water was part of something immense made his own journey feel both tiny and meaningful at the same time. He reached for the leather journal at his belt and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with entries written in a steady hand, notes on roads taken, names of people met, sketches of trees, of old towers, of random patterns in clouds that had struck him as beautiful. He turned to a blank page. For a moment, his hand hovered over it, unsure what to write. Then he began, the charcoal pencil moving slowly. First light beneath the oak, the land waking gently. No orders, no destination pressed upon me. Just the road, the sky, the sound of Bramble's steps, and a stream that reminds me that even the smallest path belongs to something greater. He paused, tapping the pencil lightly against the open page. I have fought for this land, bled for it, watched men fall upon it. Today, for once, I am only walking across it. No shield between us. He closed the journal quietly and slid it back into its place. For a little while, he simply watched the water go by, feeling the slow rhythm of his heartbeat settle into harmony with the stream's steady flow. A faint rustle sounded from the opposite bank. A doe emerged cautiously from the undergrowth, slender legs stepping lightly over stone and root. Her ears flicked, her dark eyes alert. She saw him, froze for a heartbeat, and then, perhaps reassured by his stillness, lowered her head to drink. He stayed motionless,
letting her remain unafraid. They shared the stream in silence. After a time, the doe lifted her head, water dripping from her muzzle, and slipped back into the trees without a sound, as if she had never been there at all. Aldric rose slowly and patted Bramble's neck. "Come on, then. The road won't walk itself." He guided the horse through the shallowest part of the stream, boots and hooves splashing lightly. Drops of water clung to Bramble's legs and to the bottom of Aldric's cloak. On the far side, he mounted again, and together they continued down the road, leaving the whispering water behind, but carrying its calm with them.
The land rose gradually, lifting them out of the shallow valley and into a region of older, denser forest. The trees here were taller, their trunks thick and knotted, their branches reaching so high that the leaves formed a canopy, filtering the sunlight into soft, scattered beams. The road narrowed into little more than a worn trail, flanked by ferns and low bushes. Somewhere overhead, unseen birds called to one another with strange fluting cries. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of moist earth, old bark, and something faintly resinous. Aldric loosened his grip on the reins and allowed Bramble to pick his own sure path. The horse's hooves sank into layers of fallen leaves, making almost no sound. As they rounded a gentle bend, the forest opened unexpectedly into a small clearing. In its center stood a stone structure no taller than Aldric's shoulder, a shrine, or what remained of one. Time had worn away many of its details. Bits of carving clung to the sides, half erased by moss and creeping ivy. The top was flat, with a shallow depression that might once have held offerings. Above that, sculpted into the face of the stone, was the faint outline of a lantern. Aldric felt an odd, quiet pull. He dismounted and approached, leaving Bramble to crop lazily at patches of grass around the edges of the clearing. The ground was soft beneath his boots, carpeted with a mixture of moss and dry needles. The air here felt still, as though it were holding its breath. He ran his fingers lightly over the carved lantern. Shrines like this had been built long before the realm had its current borders, before dukes and kings claimed lines on maps. They belonged to old travelers, wandering monks and wayfarers who believed in guiding lights, in small beacons along lonely roads, in the notion that a weary soul could stop and remember that it was not completely alone. The bowl carved in the top of the shrine held a small puddle of rainwater, reflecting a piece of sky. Aldric bowed his head. He was not a scholar of the old ways. His faith was simple, a belief in duty, in kindness where possible, in courage where necessary. Yet, standing here in this quiet place where countless other travelers might once have paused, he felt something like reverence stir inside him. He dipped his fingers into the rainwater and touched it to his brow, then to the center of his chest. Let my steps be steady. Let my heart be clear. Let me see this land as it truly is, not only as maps and war would have me see it. A faint breeze moved through the clearing, stirring the leaves overhead. For a moment, the light shifted, and it seemed as though the carved lantern on the stone glowed a little brighter, not with actual flame, but with a sense of remembered purpose.
Aldric remained there for a while, simply breathing. When he turned to go, he felt a subtle difference inside him. Not a revelation, not a grand calling, but a quieter sort of resolve, the kind that took root and grew slowly, like a tree. He mounted Bramble again, glancing once more at the old shrine as they left. Its presence stayed with him long after the trees closed in behind them. The forest eventually loosened its hold, the trees thinning until the sky opened above in a clear expanse of soft blue. Ahead, the sound of water met Aldric's ears once more. Not the quick murmur of a tight stream, but the broader, slower song of a wider brook. The road dipped gently and led him to a small village spread along the banks of that water. Simple cottages, their roofs thatched, clustered close to one another. Thin columns of smoke rose from stone chimneys, curling lazily toward the sky. A wooden bridge crossed the brook at its narrowest point, connecting both halves of the settlement. Children played near the water's edge, their laughter rising in bright, clear bursts. Chickens wandered freely, pecking at the ground. A dog barked once at his approach, then lost interest when Bramble passed without concern. Aldric slowed to a walk. Heads turned as he entered the village. Farmers straightened from their work in the fields. A woman paused in the act of hanging damp clothes on a line. Two older men sitting on a bench outside a small inn leaned forward slightly, shading their eyes with calloused hands. Nights were not an everyday sight here. Yet there was no panic, no hasty scrambling to avoid him. This was not a land where his presence meant imminent trouble. At least, not today. An elderly woman, her gray hair pulled back under a worn kerchief, stepped forward from the doorway of a nearby house. She carried a basket covered with a cloth that steamed faintly in the cool air. "Good day, Sir Knight," she said, inclining her head slightly. Her voice was warm but cautious. "You ride a long road." Aldric reined in, offering her a gentle nod. "Good day, mistress. Yes, the road is long, but it is kind to me this morning." She smiled at that. With one hand, she drew back the cloth over the basket, revealing loaves of fresh bread, gold-encrusted, still warm. "You look like you've been sleeping under trees instead of roofs," she said. "Take one, it's no trouble." The smell reached him, a rich, yeasty aroma that made his stomach tighten with sudden hunger. It would have been easy to take the bread, thank her, and ride on. But Aldric shook his head slightly. "I cannot take without giving," he replied. He reached for the small pouch at his belt and withdrew a silver coin. The woman's eyes widened, and she pulled the basket back. "No, no," she protested, lifting a hand. "We've no need of coin from knights. Take it as goodwill, that's all." Aldric hesitated. He looked around. The cottages were modest, the clothes were patched, the wooden fences needed repairs. These were people who made do with what they had. His coin might mean more to them than to him, but he also knew pride when he saw it, the pride of those who had little but still chose to give what they could. So instead of forcing the coin into her hand, he tucked it discreetly into a fold of cloth on the side of the basket where she wouldn't immediately see it, and took the loaf gently. "Then I accept it as goodwill," he said, "and in return I give you my thanks and this promise. As long as I draw breath, I will remember that kindness still lives in the villages of this land." She searched his face for a moment, then nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Well then, travel safely, Sir Knight." He tore off a piece of the bread and tasted it as he rode onward. It was as good as it smelled, crust crisp, inside soft and warm. He closed his eyes briefly, savoring the simplicity of it. He had eaten banquets in stone halls, heavy with banners and music, but somehow this lone piece of bread, given freely on a quiet morning, felt more nourishing. Further down the road, near the village well, a group of children gathered as he passed. One boy, braver than the rest, jogged alongside Bramble for a few steps, eyes wide as he stared at the sword at Aldric's side. "Mr. Knight," the boy blurted, "have you ever fought a dragon?" Aldric chuckled softly. "No dragons," he replied. "Only men who sometimes behaved worse than dragons." The boy frowned, confused. "Are you going to a battle now?" another child asked, clutching a ragged doll. "No," Aldric answered, and the word felt good on his tongue. "Today I'm only traveling. I'm seeing the roads, the forests, the fields. I'm learning what the world looks like when no one is fighting over it." The children exchanged glances, as if unsure what to make of a knight whose purpose was simply to look and listen. One of them waved as he began to ride away. "Goodbye, Sir Knight," he shouted. "Come back and tell us stories." Aldric lifted his hand in farewell. "Perhaps one day," I called back. "I hope the story I bring is that this village is as still, as peaceful as it is today." He crossed the small wooden bridge, listening to the hollow thump of hooves on planks. The brook gurgled beneath, sparkling in the light. On the far side, the road climbed slowly away from the village, giving him one last view. Smoke from their hearths, children's laughter, the glint of water, chickens scratching idly in the dirt. This ordinary, quiet life was what all the suffering, all the battles were supposed to protect. He whispered under his breath, "May you never know the sound of marching boots." Then he turned his eyes back to the road ahead. The land beyond the village grew smoother, the fields giving way to broader, open spaces of grass and scattered shrubs. A line of trees in the distance marked the course of a river that cut across the region like a silver band. By mid-afternoon, Aldric reached it. The river was wide but gentle, its surface rippling with slow, steady currents. A stone bridge, older than any building in the nearby village, arched over the water. Its stones were worn smooth by centuries of crossing feet, hooves, and wheels. Lichen mottled the sides in pale greens and faint yellows. He guided Bramble onto the bridge, and then pulled gently on the reins, bringing the horse to a halt in the middle. For a moment, he just listened. The water below had a different voice than the small stream from earlier. It was deeper, fuller, with a sense of patient strength. The sound of it filled the space under the arch, blending with the soft sigh of the wind moving through low shrubs along the banks. Aldric swung his leg over and dismounted, letting Bramble stand at ease. He moved to the edge of the bridge and rested his forearms upon the stone parapet, leaning forward slightly. The river flowed steadily beneath him, carrying leaves, small branches, and faint reflections of the sky along its endless path. On the far bank, reeds swayed gently, their tips catching the light. He watched the water for a long time. This place stirred old memories. There had been another bridge, years ago, on another river. Not as broad as this one, not as quiet. That bridge had been lined with men in armor, spears raised, shields locked together. He remembered the shouts, the chaos, the spray of water as someone fell over the edge. The clash of metals still echoed somewhere in the back of his mind. He closed his eyes and let the memory rise, then soften. Not all bridges were meant for battle. Some were simply meant to connect two sides of a world that would otherwise be divided. He opened his eyes again and reached for his journal. He wrote more slowly this time, the words forming with care. Stone under my hands, water under the stone. The river moves on, whether men fight above it or not. It does not remember who crossed, who fell, who claimed victory. It only carries what it must from one place to another and never asks why. I have crossed too many bridges with my sword in hand. Today I cross this one as a man alone, with no banner behind me. Perhaps that is how bridges prefer it. He paused, then added one final line. If the land could speak, I wonder if it would ask us to walk more softly. He closed the journal and slipped it away. Brambles snorted behind him, as if gently reminding him that time was still moving. Very well, Aldric murmured, patting the horse's neck as he remounted. We'll move along. The day isn't over yet. As they crossed the rest of the bridge, he cast one last look at the water, letting the image fix itself in his mind. Movement without haste, strength without fury, progress without violence. He hoped, quietly, that one day he might learn to live that way.
The sun drifted lower in the sky as Aldric followed the road away from the river, its pale light warming into deeper gold. Shadows stretched long and thin across the ground. The air took on a cooler edge, tinged with the faint smell of evening, damp soil, cooling stone, distant smoke. Ahead, the road dipped once more into a region of dense woodland. This forest was older than the one he had passed through earlier, and somehow different in character. The trees here were tall and straight, their trunks rising like columns, their branches clustered high above, layering leaves into a thick canopy that filtered the fading light into muted shades of green and amber. As soon as he passed beneath the first line of trees, the sounds of the open land softened. The wind became a murmur. The distant calls of birds turned quieter and stranger. The forest seemed to wrap around him like a cloak. It didn't feel hostile, just watchful. The road through the forest was narrower, a simple dirt track with roots breaking through in places. Bramble walked carefully, choosing each step with care. Aldric relaxed his posture, letting his head tilt back so he could study the lines of branches above, the way they formed intricate patterns against the dimming sky. Then he heard it. Not a voice, not quite, but a sound like whispering. At first he thought it was his imagination, the result of weariness and the natural hush of the woods. But as he listened, he realized it was simply the wind, threading its way through dense leaves, brushing against bark, flowing through clusters of needles high above. It created an effect unlike any he had heard elsewhere,
like a crowd of soft voices speaking all at once, saying nothing distinct, but filling the air with a feeling of quiet conversation. He smiled faintly to himself. The Whispering Forest, he thought, a fitting name if it didn't already have one. As dusk deepened, small points of light began to flicker here and there among the undergrowth. Tiny insects, their bodies glowing with gentle luminescence. They drifted lazily, rising and falling as if carried on unseen currents. Bramble's ears flicked, but he did not shy from them. He had seen stranger things in the company of men. The deeper Aldric traveled into the woods, the more the world outside receded. There were no signs of far-off villages now, no distant smoke, no sounds of human life. Only the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves, the whisper of leaves, and the soft chorus of night creatures beginning to stir. He felt a calm focus settle over him. The day had been long. He had woken under a tree, crossed streams, passed shrines, spoken with villagers, stood upon an old bridge. Each moment rested in his mind like individual beads on a string, linked together by the simple act of walking forward. But now, as evening arrived, those beads seemed to glow more softly in the dim light, as if inviting quiet reflection rather than analysis. "Not much further," he said aloud, more to break the silence than because Bramble needed reassurance. "We'll find a place to rest soon enough." The forest did not answer, but the whispering leaves seemed to approve. Eventually, the road widened slightly into a small glade, a natural clearing surrounded by tall trees. A fallen trunk, half covered in moss and small ferns, lay across one side. The ground here was mostly dry, cushioned by layers of old leaves and needles. It was as good a place as any to make camp. Aldric dismounted and loosened Bramble's girth, letting the horse graze freely on the patches of grass around the clearing. The knight gathered a few fallen branches and smaller pieces of wood, arranging them carefully. With practiced movements, he struck flint against steel until a spark caught, coaxing it gently into flame. The fire started as a small glow, then grew into a crackling bed of orange and yellow, sending up occasional sparks that drifted briefly before fading into the darkening air. Shadows deepened around the edge of the clearing, trees turning into tall, silent silhouettes. Aldric removed his mail shirt, folding it beside his pack, then eased himself down onto the fallen log. The relief in his muscles was immediate. He tore a piece from the village bread, now slightly firmer but still good, and ate it slowly, savoring each bite. He felt the fatigue of the day, but it was the good kind, earned not in battle, but through steady travel, through seeing, listening, and being present. After a time, he drew out his journal once more, letting the firelight fall across the page. He wrote of the village, of the boy who had asked about dragons, of the elderly woman with the bread. He described the stone bridge and the way the river seemed indifferent to all human affairs. He added a sketch of the lantern shrine in a margin, rough but recognizable, just in case memory blurred its image in the years to come. He was just finished a sentence about the whispering sound of the forest when he heard it again, but this time it was not leaves. It was footsteps, soft, hesitant, approaching from the shadows between the trees. Aldric closed the journal and set it aside. His hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt, but he did not draw it. Instead, he waited, listening carefully. A figure emerged from the darkness beyond the fire's circle of light. A man, older, draped in a travel-stained cloak. His beard was thin and gray, his face lined, but his eyes held a brightness that defied his apparent weariness. He carried a wooden staff, worn smooth where his hand gripped it. He paused at the edge of the light, lifting one hand slightly. "Good evening," he said, voice low and gentle. "May a weary traveler share your fire, Sir Knight?" There was no tremor of deceit in his tone, no edge of threat, only exhaustion and hope. Aldric relaxed his grip on the sword and nodded. "Of course," he replied. "There's room enough for two in the light tonight." The stranger stepped closer and lowered himself carefully onto the fallen log, stretching his hands toward the warmth of the flames. For a time, neither of them spoke. The fire cracked softly, and somewhere in the woods an owl called. "You've come far," the stranger said eventually, his gaze flicking briefly to the worn edges of Aldric's cloak, the scuffs on his boots. "So have you," Aldric returned. The older man smiled faintly. "Far enough to know that finding a campfire on the road is a blessing worth respecting." Aldric nodded in agreement. He offered a piece of bread, which the man accepted with a murmured thanks. They ate in quiet companionship. After a while, the stranger turned his head, studying Aldric more closely. "You are not like most knights I've seen," he said. "How so?" "You're no urgency in you, no restlessness. Your eyes are not scanning the trees for enemies, but listening to them. You ride with armor, yet your shoulders seem lighter than many men who ride without it." I gave a soft, rueful cuckle. "It hasn't always been so," I admitted. "But today I ride for myself. I ride to see the land without thinking only of where to place walls and where to set lines of defense. I ride to remember what I claim to protect." "That," the stranger said quietly, "is no small journey." He drew his cloak tighter around himself and looked into the fire. After a moment he continued, "I've walked many roads, seen men build and break and build again. Some say the world is cruel, others say it is beautiful. I suspect it is both, and that it becomes one or the other depending on how we choose to look at it." "And how do you choose to look at it?" Aldric asked. The man smiled, wrinkles deepening at the corners of his eyes. "I see it as something I have not yet finished learning from." They fell into a comfortable silence after that. The night deepened and the stars emerged through the breaks in the canopy overhead, pricking holes in the darkness. Before Aldric lay down to rest, the stranger spoke once more. "Sir Knight, may I offer you a thought?" "Please." "Do not only write what you see in that journal of yours. Write what you feel, too. The land is not only trees and rivers and stone. It is the way your heart responds to them. That is the part most men forget, and the part most needed." Aldric regarded him for a moment, then bowed his head. "I will remember." The stranger nodded, as if satisfied, and pulled his cloak up around his shoulders. Within minutes, his breathing had settled into the steady rhythm of sleep. Aldric lay awake a little longer, watching the embers glow and dim, thinking about rivers, bridges, villages, and the way his chest had tightened when the children asked about dragons. Eventually, too, he closed his eyes. The whispering forest kept its quiet vigil. When Aldric woke, the fire had burned down to a bed of pale ash and a few stubborn coals, faintly orange beneath a thin layer of gray. The forest was lighter now, tinted with the early colors of dawn. Birds had begun their morning songs again, more confident this time. He pushed himself up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness in his muscles. The place on the log where the stranger had sat was empty. Aldric scanned the clearing, half expecting to see the older man emerging from behind a tree or stooping to refill a water skin at some unseen trickle of water, but there was no sign of him. No staff marks in the soil, no trail of disturbed leaves. It was as if he had simply stepped into the shadows and vanished. Aldric frowned slightly, then let the tension leave his shoulders. Travelers came and went. Some left as quietly as they arrived. That was the nature of the road. He moved to where his pack lay and began to roll up his cloak, tighten straps, buckle buckles. Bramble lifted his head, ears pricking forward as if to remind him not to take too long. As Aldric approached the horse, something caught his eye. Hanging from one of the leather straps on the saddle was a small object that had not been there the night before. A charm carved from pale wood, no larger than the palm of his hand. It was shaped like a lantern, with simple lines suggesting a handle and panels. He touched it gently. The wood was smooth from careful work, its details quiet but clear. For a moment, he simply stood there, the charm resting in his hand. He thought of the old shrine in the forest, the carved lantern, the whispered prayer. He thought of the stranger's last words the night before, about writing what he felt. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips. "Thank you," he said softly, to the empty clearing, to the trees, to the idea of the man who had sat with him at the fire. "I will carry it well." He left the charm hanging from the strap, where it would sway gently with Bramble's steps, a small, silent companion. As he mounted the horse and guided him back toward the road, the forest around them seemed brighter somehow, the leaves catching the new light with a quiet shimmer. The whispering sound of the wind through the trees felt less like secrets and more like a kind of song. When they broke through the last line of trees, the open land greeted them with a soft, wide horizon. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the sun just beginning to lift itself into full view. Aldric inhaled deeply. Another day had begun. And as he rode forward, the small wooden lantern tapping softly against the saddle, he knew that whatever paths he took from here, whatever villages he saw, whatever rivers he crossed, this journey had already changed something inside him. Not with a dramatic revelation, not with a great vow, but with a series of quiet moments strung together like the beads of a simple rosary of days. A tree, a stream, a shrine, a piece of bread, a bridge, a forest, a fire, a stranger, a charm. He touched the journal at his side, feeling its familiar shape beneath his fingers. "I will write it," he murmured. "All of it. The land, the people, the feeling. So that when others asked him one day what it meant to be a knight, he could speak not only of armor and battlefields, but of mornings like this, where the hardest thing he had to do was decide which road to follow. And perhaps, he thought, that was the truest test of all.
The road stretched ahead, winding over low hills and dipping into distant valleys, half hidden by the shimmer of early light. Here and there, clusters of trees broke the monotony of the open fields, and in the far distance, he thought he could see the faint suggestion of another village, no more than a smudge of shapes against the horizon. Bramble's pace was steady, his hooves thudding softly against the packed earth. The lantern charm swung gently from the saddle strap, catching the light with each movement. Aldric let the silence linger between them for a while. His mind drifted, not backward this time, but forward. There would be more days like this, he hoped. More dawns under unfamiliar trees, more conversations with strangers, more signs of quiet, resilient life in places most nobles never thought about. There would be more chances to confirm with his own eyes that the land was more than a battleground, and that people were more than numbers in a lord's tax ledger. He would return, eventually, to halls of stone and rooms full of important voices. There would be reports to give, decisions to help make, counsel to offer. But the voice he brought back would be different now. It would carry not only the weight of loyal service, but the memory of a stream, a loaf of bread, a boy asking about dragons, an old man who spoke like a teacher and vanished like a ghost. He imagined standing in a council chamber, someone speaking of the realm as if it were a single, simple thing. He would remember this road instead, uneven, wandering, quiet. He leaned forward slightly and patted Bramble's neck. "We'll keep going for a while. No need to rush. The world will still be there when we arrive." The horse's ears flicked back briefly, as if in agreement. He reached for his journal again as they rode, opening it one-handed, the reins held loosely in the other. The pages fluttered in the breeze before he settled on a blank space. The words that came were not a report, not a strategy, not a plan. They were something softer. A knight is not only a sword in a lord's hand. A knight is also a pair of eyes that sees the land, a pair of ears that hear the people, a heart that remembers that peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of mornings like this. If I am to serve truly, I must carry not just the stories of battles, but the memory of the quiet roads between them. He paused, then wrote a final line, a private vow. I will walk softly where I can, and stand firmly where I must, and never forget that the land I defend is made of villages and streams and whispering forests, and not just the stones of castles. He closed the journal and tucked it away. The sun continued its climb. The day spread out before him, full of unknowns, new faces, new paths, new chances to listen and learn. He smiled, a small, genuine curve of the lips. Come on, Bramble. Let's see what waits beyond the next hill. And so Sir Aldric rode onward, his armor light on his shoulders, his sword at his side, but his hand far from its hilt, his heart open to the quiet teachings of the road. Not toward glory,
not toward a grand final battle, but toward a deeper understanding of the land he loved, one peaceful step at a time.